Sharks are among the most fascinating yet misunderstood predators in the ocean. They have dominated the seas for millions of years, thanks to their streamlined bodies, powerful jaws, and sharp senses. Despite their fearsome reputation, most shark species pose little threat to humans. However, many are now endangered due to habitat destruction and overfishing. Understanding sharks is essential for protecting ocean biodiversity and ensuring their survival. Here are 6 stories. With its golden light reflecting off the undulating waves, the sun hung high over the Pacific. In 2002, a yacht glided through the water off the coast of Vancouver, British Columbia. Rachel Fairchild's upcoming motherhood was celebrated with 9 friends aboard the 60-foot luxury vessel Celeste, which was the ideal venue for a private baby shower. Rachel, an interior designer with a keen sense of style, had invited a mix of co-workers and friends from her past. Among them were her best friend Corinne Mendez, her husband Lucas Fairchild, a venture capitalist, and Corinne's husband Victor Mendez, who had chartered the yacht. Hazel Dupree, a yoga instructor, Tobias Toby Remington, an amateur filmmaker, Evangeline Sloan, an outspoken journalist, and Sally, a nutritionist, college friends in common, were among those present. It had been a perfect start to the day. The air was filled with laughter, the aroma of grilled seafood and the flow of champagne. As guests celebrated Rachel's pregnancy while lounging on the sun deck, a gentle melody played. Charles Devereaux, the yacht's captain, had promised them calm waters, which only served to highlight the tragedy that would later unfold. Toby was the first to notice the enormous shadow beneath the waves. He had been using his camcorder, hoping to capture some picturesque shots, when he saw a dark, moving shape just below the surface. The creature's immense size sent a chill down his spine, despite the water distorting its dimensions. Before he could raise the alarm, the yacht jolted sharply. Glasses shattered and some guests staggered, grabbing onto the railings. Victor nearly stumbled at the stern. It felt as though something massive had rammed the hull from below. Captain Charles rushed out of the control room, his tanned face turning pale. He shouted something about checking below deck, but a harder blow silenced his words. As the yacht lurched, it tilted sharply to the right. It was as if the ocean had punched a hole in the ship, and water exploded through the lower deck. Panic struck. Rachel instinctively clutched her stomach, ready to run, but there was nowhere to go. Ever the cynic, Evangeline tried to rationalize the situation. She muttered of a rogue wave as though speaking it aloud would make it true. Then the dorsal fin broke the surface, its tall, sharp blade cutting through the water like a knife. A great white shark, larger than any they had ever seen, turned the shadow beneath the waves into a terrifying reality. Its massive body sliced through the swells with effortless power. The shark struck again, its sheer weight crashing into the yacht's hull, sending screams erupting from the guests. The consequences were disastrous. As the ship sank deeper into the ocean, water poured into the cabins below. When Charles tried to send a distress signal, the yacht's electronics had already begun to malfunction. They were completely alone. Victor urged Corinne toward the life rafts, tossing her a life jacket, but the yacht's rapid descent made escape nearly impossible. As the bow tilted forward, Tobias slipped, his camcorder falling from his hand. He never had the chance to retrieve it. Once more the shark attacked, this time fully breaking through the water. Tobias was dragged beneath the waves before anyone could react. The shark's wide maw, lined with rows of sharp teeth, clamped down on him with sickening finality. As the yacht rapidly sank, Hazel's scream pierced the chaos as she rushed to the railing. The remaining guests were forced into the turbulent water. In a desperate attempt to avoid being pulled under, Evangeline clung to a floating seat cushion. Rachel and Lucas were fortunate enough to latch onto a piece of debris, but others were not so lucky. The waves separated Victor and Corinne. She reached out to touch him, but the shark returned before their fingers could meet. With a horrible splash and a flash of gray, Victor vanished. As the water swirled red, his life jacket disappeared beneath the surface. Before Corinne could even scream, the beast's tail lashed out violently, sending her plunging into the water. Rachel spotted Hazel trying to climb an overturned portion of the yacht, but the predator struck again before she could get to her feet. The shark's powerful jaws clamped around Hazel's legs, dragging her beneath the waves. For a moment, her hands thrashed in a desperate struggle before disappearing into the chasm. Amidst the wreckage and rising chaos, Captain Charles and Sally were lost to the depths, swept away by the shark's savage onslaught. Their bodies were never found. Surrounded by the wreckage of the yacht, Rachel, Lucas, and Evangeline, the 3 survivors, were forced to tread water. The shark circled, its fins slicing through the water, waiting. They had no boat, no radio, and no way of knowing if help would come. The wait felt agonizingly long. The chill set in. Lucas held Rachel tightly, whispering assurances she wasn't sure she believed. Gasping and shivering, Evangeline floated nearby, her usual bluster gone. Hours passed before a passing fishing boat spotted the debris. As the rescuers examined the wreckage, their faces were grim as they hauled the survivors aboard. Only 3 survivors were left out of the 9 who had sailed that morning. Rachel could hardly recall what happened next. Reporters flooded in, and investigators debated whether the shark had been provoked or if it had been a freak incident. Some suggested the shark had been attracted by the scent of food on board, while others blamed the movement of the yacht. In the end, it made no difference. The undeniable truth was that 6 lives had been lost in a matter of minutes, and those who survived would forever remember the terrifying sight beneath the waves. What started as a joyful baby shower had turned into a lifelong nightmare for Rachel. Death had come from the celebration that was meant to mark the beginning of a new life. A few months later, Rachel would give birth to a son, naming him Tobias, in honor of the friend who had first noticed the shadow in the water. Trauma bound Rachel, Lucas, and Evangeline together, even years later. The shark and that terrible day were never spoken of, but they were constantly reminded of the horror that had waited, watched, and was poised to strike again. The roar of the ocean or the sun glinting off the waves would always bring back memories of the attack. The intense heat wave that struck the heart of Gold Coast City, Australia in the summer of 2011 drove both residents and visitors to the Pacific. Bars were packed, beaches crowded, and the wealthy reveled in their luxury aboard opulent yachts, making the city a hive of activity. Among them was Liam Vanderholt, a 32-year-old tech entrepreneur with a taste for excess. The season's biggest event was set to be his bachelor party, hosted on the $20 million yacht Solstice. At midday, the Solstice sailed from the Southport Marina, stocked with the finest booze, exquisite dining, and a host of famous guests. Arlo Vexler, Liam's best friend, had spared no expense to make the evening unforgettable. Only darkness and the sound of breaking waves filled the air as the yacht drifted miles from the coast. The smell of whiskey, cigars, and perspiration lingered as the evening wore on. The men cheered, placed bets, and boasted about their financial triumphs, each in varying states of intoxication. Liam's level of drunkenness peaked at midnight. His speech became nearly incoherent, his shirt unbuttoned, and his tanned skin slick with sweat. A drunken challenge was thrown out, but no one took it seriously. He claimed he was going to dive into the sea. Liam stumbled toward the railing, pulling himself up onto it as the others laughed it off. His friends protested grudgingly, but the idea amused their drunken brains. He threw himself off the yacht and crashed into the dark water below before anyone could react. In an instant, the sea engulfed him. For a brief moment, nothing moved. His arms flailed as he cackled, and his head appeared. The constant hum of the yacht's engines was mingled with the laughter of his friends as they cheered. Felix O'Dare threw a pool noodle at him, but Liam chose to float farther away from the boat instead. They were all unaware that the warm waters off the coast of Gold Coast served as a hunting ground. Prowling these depths were bull sharks, renowned for their aggressiveness and brackish water tolerance. The trash left behind by fishing boats and the general bustle of Gold Coast nightlife had served as their attraction. Specifically, a big male that was almost 8 feet long had been circling the area. Liam's unpredictable swimming motions mirrored the difficulties faced by injured prey. The shark closed in, acting instinctively. Beneath the surface, a shadow moved with deadly accuracy. Liam was unaware of the threat. He tried swimming back to the yacht but was unable to get his limbs to cooperate. His coordination was impaired by the alcohol, and the waves that had previously seemed harmless now felt like chains dragging him down. Then the blow hit, an abrupt, intense shock to his leg. At first, the pain went unnoticed. Before the reality set in, it felt more like pressure, almost otherworldly. When the shark twisted its enormous body, a set of serrated teeth clamped down just above Liam's knee, yanking him below the surface. The splash was all the others on the yacht saw. Where Liam had been moments before, only a ripple remained in the water, followed by a red bloom spreading across the waves. Felix was the first to respond, his drunken stupor vanishing in an instant. "Liam!" he shouted, his voice sharp enough to cut through the laughter around him. As they stared at the dark water, the others fell silent. Then Liam reappeared, screaming. None of them would ever forget that sound. Guttural, pure pain. Before the shark dragged him under again, Liam's arms flailed wildly, his mouth gasping for air. Panic erupted. The crew shouted for the floodlights to be turned on, while another fumbled for a life preserver. Liam's pale body, struggling against the crimson sea, was a horrifying sight as the beams illuminated the water. His jagged wound was gushing blood and his leg was gone from the knee down. Unfazed, the shark returned for another attack, slicing through the water with its sleek body. Captain Cyrus Maldonado, an experienced sailor who had witnessed his fair share of nautical horrors, acted without hesitation. He knew it was too late, but he grabbed a harpoon gun from the emergency kit. Liam's thrashing had become weaker, and his screams had faded into gurgles when his head finally broke the surface again. But then the water completely engulfed him. The world fell silent for a few seconds. The men on board the Solstice stood motionless, their drunken bravado shattered. Felix dropped to his knees, his white knuckles clutching the railing. With the useless life preserver still in his hand, Arlo choked back a sob. The Coast Guard was called, but it took almost half an hour for them to arrive. By that time, Liam Vanderholt had vanished from sight, dragged into the depths by the shark. All that remained of his existence were the blood-stained waves and one ripped loafer. The authorities declared it an accident, a tragic case of reckless behavior colliding with nature's indifference. The media picked up the story, dubbing it the billionaire's final swim. Talk show hosts made morbid jokes about Darwinism, while conspiracy theorists speculated that Liam's rivals had orchestrated his murder. They questioned the partygoers and confiscated the Solstice for investigation. With shocked expressions, each of them gave a slurred account of the night. Felix, Liam's former right-hand man, fell into a deep depression, turning to stronger than alcohol to numb his guilt. Arlo retreated into obscurity, vanishing from view. A week later, the remains of Liam were discovered washed up on a secluded section of beach by a local fisherman. Only a torso and part of an arm remained after the sharks had finished their grisly work. Due to its previous owner's reluctance to maintain a vessel tied to such a graphic past, the Solstice was sold at auction. The new owner, a superstitious billionaire from Dubai, had it exorcised before boarding. As always, Gold Coast moved on. The ocean, indifferent as ever, continued to churn against the shores, carrying with it the silent echoes of those who had been foolish enough to test its depths. Stretching endlessly under the early morning sun, the Pacific Ocean off the coast of California was frigid and dark. The waters near San Clemente Island, which the United States Navy used for training exercises in 2007, were known for their shark activity. The largely desolate and windswept island served as an essential site for deep-sea exercises due to its remoteness and erratic underwater conditions. On a Navy ship, officers were preparing for yet another demanding underwater training session as the waves gently brushed against the sides. One of them, Lieutenant Mark Williams, was an experienced officer with years of deep-sea operations under his belt. Nothing had ever made Lieutenant Mark Williams feel uneasy like the Pacific, despite his training in various settings, including the icy Arctic seas and the murky East Coast rivers. A primal chill ran down his spine, not just because of the vastness, but the way the deep blue seemed to vanish so quickly into an abyss. Still, training was required, and that morning, he was paired with Lieutenant Gabriel Drexler. Drexler was a competent but superstitious officer who constantly reminded the team of the dangers lurking beneath. Their task was simple: to practice deep-water navigation while simulating rescue efforts. The two men suited up, checked their gear, and slid into the ocean's icy embrace. The water surrounding them was eerily quiet during their smooth descent, save for the occasional spike in the communication static. They followed the designated course, swimming side by side and dodging underwater markers set by earlier training groups. Then came the moment that shattered the pattern. Something stirred in the murky distance. Larger than anything they had encountered, a shadow glided effortlessly through the water. At first, it was merely a shape blending with the shadows of the depths. But as it circled, its immense size became impossible to ignore. At least 16 feet in length, the great white shark's muscular body sliced through the water with frightening ease. Williams was aware of the protocol, which called for maintaining composure, avoiding abrupt movements, and adopting a defensive posture. The voice of his teacher from years ago was practically audible as he was being taught the fundamentals. However, there was a difference between knowing and doing, particularly when confronted with a predator that could kill with a single bite. The shark made 2 passes around them, getting closer with each one. It studied them, assessing them with the eerie assurance of an apex predator. The 2 officers stayed as motionless as they could, holding onto their knives as a last resort in case something went wrong rather than as weapons, because dealing with a creature of this size was impossible. Things didn't work out. There was an abrupt change in the flow, a brief movement, and instinct took over. As a tiny, uncontrollable response to the excruciating tension, Williams hardly noticed that his own leg had twitched. Still, it was sufficient. Instantly responding, the shark charged forward with frightful swiftness. Williams experienced an unfathomable pressure clamp around his thigh before he could comprehend what was happening. After a dull, crushing pain went through his body, he became aware of the warmth of the water in the distance, his blood obscuring the surrounding sea. He pressed the emergency beacon on his vest, and Drexler responded immediately, kicking upward. Williams was jerked downward, the shark flailing as it tried to drag him deeper, and he felt the world tilt. The pressure caused his ears to ring, and his vision wavered between the ocean's bottomless blue and the searing red of his blood. He clawed at the creature with all his remaining strength, but his fingers were ineffective against the shark's rough, sandpaper-like hide. The shark then let him go as abruptly as it had attacked. Maybe it was startled by the sudden flurry of activity from above, or perhaps it had just grown disinterested. As his body fought to function, Williams felt himself drifting, and the pain became a sharp, distant sensation. Drexler, determined to reach the surface first, thrashed in the water to attract the rescue crew's attention. Within seconds, divers were in the water, reaching Williams's side just as he started to lose consciousness. They hauled him onto the boat, and the crew immediately went to work, staunching the bleeding. His leg was a mess of torn muscle and exposed bone, and his wetsuit was shredded. Petty Officer Vince Larkins, the medic, shouted quick commands to the team while doing his best to stabilize Williams. Barely conscious, Williams barely registered the panicked voices around him. Despite the excruciating pain, he occasionally found grim humor in the midst of it all. Throughout his career, he had encountered many dangers, but ultimately a prehistoric predator had come dangerously close to killing him. The rescue helicopter hurried him to a military hospital in San Diego after it arrived in minutes. Although they were able to prevent amputation, the damage was significant despite the surgeon's tireless efforts to save his leg. He underwent numerous medical evaluations and exhausting physical therapy sessions during his protracted recuperation. Though it wasn't easy, Williams was able to walk again, but the psychological scars were far deeper than the physical ones. Still shaken by the incident, Drexler transferred to a new position a few months later, unwilling to face the unidentified deep-sea horrors again. As for Williams, his Navy career was essentially over. His time in the military had come to an end, though he continued to serve in a different capacity. Despite everything, his reverence for the ocean and its creatures remained unwavering. Years later, Williams was questioned about the assault during an interview for a military documentary. Rather than dramatizing or embellishing, he simply presented the facts. When asked if he still feared the ocean, he smirked knowingly, responding in a way that only someone who had faced death could. To him, fear didn't matter to the ocean, it was simply what it was. Off the northeastern coast of Queensland, Australia, the glistening waters of the Coral Sea were bathed in the shimmering radiance of the morning sun. In 2006, thousands of tourists flocked to the Great Barrier Reef, one of the most renowned marine ecosystems in the world. Its vibrant coral formations and abundant aquatic life attracted visitors from across the globe. Among them was Samantha Elridge, a 29-year-old Canadian marine enthusiast who had been drawn to the area for its rich biodiversity and scenic beauty. Excited to explore the underwater wonders she had dreamed about since childhood, Samantha had arrived in Cairns a week earlier. Having been snorkeling for years and being a strong swimmer, she had taken a guided tour to see Osprey Reef, a less visited area of the reef. Located more than 220 kilometers off Queensland's coast, this isolated atoll was well known for its deep drop-offs, whirling currents, and sporadic encounters with large marine predators. Early in the morning, the tour group, including novice and experienced snorkelers, left Port Douglas. To ensure that safety precautions were taken, the skilled crew of the boat carried food, medical supplies, and equipment. The guides informed the group about possible hazards, such as strong currents and interactions with marine life. The region was known to be home to tiger sharks, but human tiger-shark encounters and attacks were extremely uncommon. The guides reassured everyone that there was nothing to be afraid of as long as they did as they were told. The vessel had anchored at a spotless reef ledge by mid-morning. The water's surreal turquoise hue provided almost perfect visibility. Astonished by the profusion of marine life, Samantha and the others slipped into the water, while green sea turtles moved fluidly through the current. Schools of parrotfish darted between coral formations. As the group explored, Samantha drifted further away from the boat, mesmerized by the reef's beauty. She was confident from her strong swimming abilities and relished the solitude, so she wasn't worried. The coral was illuminated by the sun's rays as they passed through the water, creating a captivating display of color. The change in the water energy was then noticeable. Suddenly, there was silence among the fish. The small fish that had been circling her seemed to vanish into the reef's nooks and crannies. An unmistakable tension began to build, though Samantha, initially unaware of the change, continued admiring the coral. Then something emerged from the depths. A tiger shark about 3 meters long glided through the water with purposeful ease, its striped body moving gracefully. As an apex predator, it exuded confidence, undisturbed and unchallenged in its domain. Its dark eyes locked on Samantha as its wide head swayed slightly to take in its surroundings. She became aware of it after a moment. Her body stiffened, and she gasped for air. Her instincts and training prevented her from panicking. Although tiger sharks were renowned for their curiosity, they were not mindless murderers. It was probably going to lose interest if she stayed composed. The shark kept a deliberate distance from her as it circled her. Keeping her body motionless, she hoped the encounter would be short. However, the predator didn't change course. Rather, it made its loop tighter, getting closer with each pass. An abrupt jolt of motion broke the tenseness. The shark suddenly lunged, its powerful jaws sinking into her left thigh. A searing, excruciating pain shot through her as she felt its teeth pierce muscle and flesh. The once pure blue water turned murky red as blood spilled into it. She kicked wildly, the pain momentarily dulled by the rush of adrenaline. There was a brief reprieve from the shark's grip, but then it struck again, this time seizing her torso. The force of the attack expelled air from her lungs, and she fought desperately to break free. Oliver Rennick, one of the boat's guides, noticed the disturbance in the water. At first, he thought Samantha had simply ventured too far. But then he saw the unmistakable red bloom spreading beneath the surface. The emergency alarm went off immediately. The first to respond were 2 other snorkelers, Russell Dorn and Inaya Vasquez, who had witnessed the attack from a nearby location. Ignoring their own fear, they swam towards Samantha in an attempt to pull her away. By the time they reached her, the shark had apparently satisfied its curiosity, or hunger, and vanished into the depths. Holding Samantha between them, Russell and Inaya kicked frantically toward the boat. The crew rushed to bring her aboard, dragging her onto the deck with blood-stained hands. It was immediately clear how badly she had been injured. Her torso bore severe wounds, and her thigh was mangled with deep gashes that exposed the bone. To stop the bleeding, Lucia Behrens, the crew's medic, applied gauze to the worst of the injuries. Samantha's body trembled in shock, and her breathing was shallow and labored. After sending out a distress signal to emergency personnel, the boat quickly made its way back to the mainland. The closest medical facility was hours away, and Osprey Reef was a remote location. Despite the crew's best efforts to keep Samantha conscious, she passed away from her wounds before they could get her to shore. Her death sent shockwaves through the community and beyond. The rare and tragic attack made headlines in media outlets, sparking widespread attention. Conservationists and marine biologists weighed in, reminding the public that tiger sharks were instinctive wild creatures, not mindless killers. Others called for improved safety protocols, more stringent rules, and even the removal of large sharks from popular snorkeling locations. However, Australian authorities resisted impulsive measures. While the attack was devastating, experts emphasized that such incidents were still rare. They focused more on education than on culling, urging visitors to travel in groups, stay within approved areas, and remain as close to safety zones as possible. As they mourned their loss, Samantha's family chose not to hold the shark responsible. They were fully aware of the dangers that came with Samantha's love for the ocean. In her honor, they established a marine conservation fund dedicated to studying shark behavior and advocating for safer interactions between people and wildlife. The waters off Queensland remained wild and untouched by human influence, just as they had been for thousands of years. Adventurers, some cautious, some fearless, but all aware of the delicate balance between nature's beauty and its unpredictable power, continued to be drawn to the Great Barrier Reef. It was 2010. Beneath the unrelenting midday sun, the Atlantic stretched endlessly, deep and ever-shifting. Nearly 100 miles off the coast of Bermuda, the research vessel Eurybia drifted aimlessly in the open ocean. The mission was clear: install tracking devices and study the migration patterns of oceanic white-tip sharks. Experienced marine biologist Tomislav Tom Radovich had volunteered to handle the tagging himself. The waters were well known for their abundance of pelagic predators. The oceanic white-tip was a powerful predator that often lingered near the surface, its broad pectoral fins slicing through the water like wings. In the deep, remote waters where food was scarce, these sharks were infamous for their opportunistic aggression. Tom was fully aware of the dangers. Having studied shark behavior for years, Tom was keenly aware of the unpredictability of these animals. As he carefully lowered his tagging gear into the water, he found himself suspended in the vast expanse of blue. Sunlight filtered down in sluggish shafts, The water was crystal clear and visibility was excellent. A few pilot fish hovered nearby, their presence often signaling the approach of a larger predator. The Eurybia appeared as a tiny speck against the boundless horizon looming in the distance. For the first few minutes, everything went according to plan. Tom surveyed the area and adjusted his diving equipment. Then, he saw it, a shadow emerging from the depths, moving slowly and deliberately toward him, a sea-level whitetip. It was a massive specimen, with rounded fins and a muscular, streamlined body that was likely over 8 feet long. The mottled pattern on its dorsal sides glistened in the refracted light. Uncomfortably curious, the shark's small, round eyes locked onto him as it circled once, then again. Tom remained still. He had seen this behavior before, a mix of caution and predatory intent. As the shark approached, it swerved in and out of his vicinity. Tom cautiously reached for the tagging pole, careful not to make any sudden movements. He knew disturbing a large predator in open water was a dangerous move, but as soon as his arm extended, the shark reacted. It lunged. Tom was violently spun around in the water as a sudden force struck his side. A sharp, intense pain shot through his upper arm. He saw the shark's strong jaws clamping down on his wetsuit, its rows of sharp teeth slicing through the fabric. Instinct took over. With his blood clouding the water in a murky bloom, he withdrew. Though the shark hadn't finished, it released its hold and made a sharp turn, ready to strike again. Tom kicked forcefully, propelling himself toward the surface. Despite his training urging him not to panic, adrenaline surged, overpowering reason. He was losing blood quickly, but the Eurybia was still within reach. He had to get back before the shark returned. The disturbance had already been noticed from the research vessel's deck. Orders were shouted by lead scientist Dr. Evelyn Koss. As the boat's engines roared to life, the crew scrambled to lower a safety line. It wasn't until the force of the second attack knocked the air from Tom's lungs that he realized what had happened. This time, the shark delivered a disorienting blow to his leg rather than a full bite. The open wound burned from the sting of the salt water as he flailed. The shark seemed to be teasing him, testing him. Then, just as suddenly as it had struck, it swerved away. Perhaps the shark's senses were confused by the boat's sudden movement or by the shifting current of blood dispersing in the water. Whatever the reason, Tom seized the brief moment to grab the trailing rope. His vision tunneled from shock and exhaustion as he clutched the rope with his uninjured arm. Strong hands pulled him aboard, and the deck tilted beneath him as his body gave way, collapsing onto the sun-scorched metal. His wound was covered with a towel. When the radio crackled in the distance, it was calling for help. He was barely conscious, hearing Evelyn curse through the haze, her voice a mix of relief and frustration. Tom was stable by the time they reached the coast. Though he had lost a significant amount of blood and needed emergency care, he would survive. His arm bore severe cuts from the attack, with torn muscles and damaged nerves. As a permanent reminder of what lay beneath the calm surface of the open ocean, the scars would never fade. The incident sparked controversy within scientific circles. The question lingered. Was the attack purely predatory, or was the shark acting territorially or responding to movement? Oceanic whitetips had long been known for their boldness and aggression. Permanently changed by the experience, Tom became determined to learn more about these mysterious creatures. The ocean, vast, uncaring, and unpredictable, had nearly taken his life, but it had also saved him. The study continued, and the oceanic whitetip, unrelenting and uncompromising, continued to cruise the seas, unaffected by the fleeting encounter between predator and human in the deep blue emptiness. The waters off the Australian state of Queensland were bathed in a golden glow during the summer of 2013. Beneath the surface, the Great Barrier Reef stretched out, an immense and complex network of coral formations teeming with marine life. Despite its breathtaking biodiversity, the area also posed a silent threat. While most people feared box jellyfish and stonefish, a more dangerous predator, bull sharks, lurked in the depths. Jack Moreau and Sophie Callahan, both seasoned divers with years of experience, had set out that day to explore an area known as ribbon reefs, a series of isolated coral structures that attracted a rich variety of marine species. They had made many dives together before, always moving with caution and strategy. To them, the ocean had never seemed dangerous, but within minutes that would change. As they descended into the glistening water, they marveled at the sheer beauty of their surroundings. Schools of fish, their iridescent bodies reflecting the sunlight filtering down from above, darted through the coral. A sea turtle glided past them effortlessly while a moray eel peered out from a crack. Sophie, always fascinated by the finer details of the reef, paused to examine a colony of anemones. Jack, keeping an eye on air levels and dive duration, hovered nearby. The peace was shattered when Sophie suddenly became tangled in a mess of abandoned fishing lines. The nylon cords, a careless remnant of human activity, tightly encircled her leg and one arm, restricting her movement. Her heartbeat quickened as she struggled to free herself. When Jack noticed that Sophie was upset, he swam to her side and urged her to stay calm. He tried to cut through the thick knots with his diving knife, but it was proving difficult. The water around them seemed to stir with an invisible force as Jack focused on cutting the lines. The change was subtle at first, an eerie stillness in the surrounding fish and a shift in the current. Then from the dark depths a bull shark surfaced. Unlike others that might circle warily, evaluating their prey, this shark moved deliberately. It was drawn to Sophie's struggles and the vibrations, sensing an easy opportunity. The predator was closing in when Jack finally saw it. At almost 3 meters in length, the shark was enormous, its muscular body exuding raw power. It didn't hesitate. In an instant, it lunged, its wide jaws snapping shut and clamping down on Jack's leg with terrifying speed. A surge of pain shot through him as the shark's sharp teeth tore through bone and muscle. The force of the attack yanked him downward, pulling him deeper into the blue abyss. As Sophie watched Jack disappear into the depths, terror gripped her. Her fear was momentarily numbed by the rush of adrenaline surging through her veins. Ignoring the deep abrasions left by the fishing line on her skin, Sophie made one last desperate twist and wrenched herself free. Without hesitation, she hurled herself downward, searching for Jack. The shark briefly released its grip on him before circling back, drawn to the blood clouding the water. Disoriented and growing weaker, Jack tried to fight the shark off, but as he struggled against the pain, his knife slipped from his grasp. Just as the shark was about to strike again, Sophie reached him. She quickly grabbed hold of Jack's buoyancy compensator and inflated it. They were suddenly pulled upward by the abrupt lift, but the shark relentlessly followed. The surface seemed to grow farther away with every passing second. Blood loss made Jack's consciousness waver. Sophie's body screamed for oxygen as she continued to kick upward, driven by pure survival instinct and determination. Above them, the dive boat crew had already noticed the disturbance in the water. As a shadow passed overhead, one of the crew jumped into action, grabbing a long metal pole and striking the water to scare the shark away. The predator, sensing the change in power, swerved off. The crew quickly hauled Jack aboard just as Sophie broke the surface, gasping for air. His leg was a mangled mess, flesh torn away and bone exposed. Without hesitation, the crew applied a tourniquet to stop the bleeding and contacted the nearest rescue service. Sophie, trembling, pressed her hand to Jack's face, urging him to stay awake with a terrified voice. The sound of the helicopter's rotor blades finally broke the tension as paramedics arrived on the deck. The minutes dragged on as they raced toward the mainland. Though Jack survived, the attack left both physical and psychological scars. After months of rehabilitation and several surgeries, he would never fully regain mobility in his leg. The ocean, once a place of wonder, had become a reminder of his near-death experience. Sophie, too, carried invisible wounds from that day. The memory of those chaotic moments beneath the surface dulled the excitement of diving, and the water no longer felt as safe. Despite everything, they never held the shark accountable. It had simply been following its instincts in a world where survival was paramount. That one dive, however, changed Jack and Sophie's perception of the ocean's beauty and cruelty. Jack's recovery was long and difficult. Physical therapy became his new routine, a painful reminder of what he had lost. Walking again was a struggle, and each step brought back vivid memories of the shark's bite. Even though Sophie knew Jack wasn't ready to return to the water, she visited him regularly, bringing news from the diving community. She doubted he ever would. Jack's nightmares became less frequent over the weeks, but they never fully disappeared. The deep blue, once his haven, now felt like a vast, unpredictable force. The attack had changed him, deepening his appreciation for life. Despite coming close to death, he survived. Still, Sophie felt drawn back to the ocean. Each time she put on her diving gear, her hands would shake, but she refused to let fear take away what she loved. Months after the attack, she returned to the reef alone on a calm afternoon. She had to face her fears. As she descended, the reef appeared just as it had before, bright and alive, as if nothing had changed. But for Sophie, everything had. Aware of every shift in the water and every shadow, she moved with caution yet found an unexpected calm as she drifted through the coral. The ocean remained beautiful despite its dangers, and Sophie refused to let fear take that away from her. Jack never returned to diving, but he found comfort in capturing the ocean's splendor through photography from the safety of the shore. His legs still bore the scars from that fateful day, a constant reminder of the attack. Despite their diverging paths after the incident, their bond remained unbreakable. Together they had faced and survived death. The bull shark swam somewhere in the vast ocean, unaware of the long-term impact it had on their lives. The sea remained both awe-inspiring and terrifying, where the luckiest survived but not always the strongest. Jack Moreau and Sophie Callahan had been incredibly fortunate that day.